Today we're going to review some basic decimal skills and concepts. We're going to start off with a problem like what decimal is 1/10 of 4/10. This decimal is 4/10. We know that because the 4 is in the tenths place. And we also know that if we have to find 1/10 of something, the value is going to get smaller. So if we have 4/10 and we want 1/10 of that, we're going to end up moving the 4 to a smaller place value column, which would be the hundredths place. So the quick way to do that, we move the decimal one time to the left. So our answer would now place the 4 in the hundredths column. So our answer would be 4 hundredths. If the opposite is presented, where we have to find what decimal is 10 times as much of a decimal, here we have 42 hundredths, we're going to move the decimal in the opposite direction. We're going to move the decimal to the right one time. The 4 will end up in a higher place value column. It will end up in front of the decimal in the ones place, and the 2 will move from the hundredths place to the tenths place. We have to keep in mind that we're moving the decimal one place either to the left or to the right because our place value system is based on tens. In each column, as we move right, we'll get 1/10 smaller, and each column as we move to the left, we'll get 1/10 larger. So if we kind of show this again in the next two problems, what decimal is 1/10 of 2 and 1/10? Well, that means we have to move, since we're taking 1/10, we know the number is going to get smaller, and these digits have to move to smaller place value columns to the right. In order to do that, we're going to do the opposite, move the decimal to the left. To move the 2 one place to the right, we have to move it from the ones place to the tenths place, right behind the decimal. We have to move the 1 from the tenths place to a smaller place value column to the hundredths place. We can put a 0 in front of the decimal as a placeholder, but that 0, remember, is optional. So 2 and 1/10, we have 1/10 of that becomes 21 hundredths. What decimal is 10 times as much as 7/10? If it's 10 times as much, we know this number is going to grow in value. The 7 is going to move to a higher place value column. In order to do that, we have to move the decimal to the right. To move the 7 over one place, from the tenths place into the ones place, so the value is now 7. To pose a question to you then, if we move the decimal one time because we were taking 1/10 of a number or finding 10 times as much of a number, I want you to think about how many times we would have to move the decimal if we wanted to find 1/100th of a number or 100 times as much. Keeping in mind that our place value system is based on powers of 10 and each place value column increasing or decreasing by tens, we think of the number 100 either down here in this denominator or here. 10 times 10 is 100. So 100 represents 2 place value columns. So we would have to move the decimal 2 times to the left or 2 times to the right to find the new value if we're going to find 1/100th of a number or 100 times as much. That's just a little extra tidbit there. That's not on your worksheet, but it's just a little piece of extra information that we went over in class. We also need to keep straight what the value of a digit is. The value is different from its place value or its place. If we're looking for the place of a digit, we simply want to know what column it's in. If we want to know the value of a digit, then we want to know what is that digit worth in that column. So thinking about that, I'll repeat that. We want to find what the value of this 6 is, not just its place, but how much is it worth. Well, if we count it out, we know the decimal's here, so the tenths place is behind the decimal. Then we have hundredths. We know the column, or the place that it's in. To get its value, we just have to know that if a 6 is in the hundredths place, it's worth 6 hundredths. We can write that value either out in word form, or we can write it out in decimal form, where we're making sure we put the 6 in the hundredths place, the second place behind the decimal. So either of those answers would be acceptable. So if we're looking at the next one and we want to find the value of the 8, the value is how much is this 8 worth? The 8 is in the first column behind the decimal, so that means it is in the tenths place. If we have 8 in the tenths column, it will be worth 8 tenths. We can again write that in words, or we can write that in decimal form, again double checking, making sure that we have the 8 in the tenths place right behind the decimal. Now to find the value of the 6 in this last one, we notice the 6 is actually in front of the decimal. It's in the ones place. A 6 in the ones place is worth 6 ones, or simply the number 6. Keep in mind that you do have to make sure that you have memorized and learned that the decimal place behind the decimal point is the tenths place. The column behind the tenths is hundredths, and the column behind the hundredths is thousandths. I will not take off for spelling on the test, as long as I can tell what word you're trying to spell, but it's very important that you include the THS at the end of the decimal place value column names. Now, when you're reading a decimal, you're going to be converting it into word form. Just as we've been practicing reading decimals, all you're doing now is reading the decimal and actually writing it out in words. So if we look at this first one, we know we have to read what's in front of the decimal first, so we would say 3. When we get to the decimal, we say and then we read what's behind the decimal, 21. And the last word we would say would be the column that the last digit is in. So if we count that out, the 2 is in the tenths place, the 1 is in the hundredths place. So this would read 3 and 21 hundredths. Again, spelling here is not going to be counted against you as long as I can read read the word that you're trying to communicate. But just remember, we need the THS down here at the end of the place value column name for a decimal. The second example has a 0 in the ones place. We would not read 0 and, because 0 does not have a value. When you have a number such as this, you will not read anything until the part behind the decimal. And you read that as one complete number, 801, and then you count out your decimal places to see what column it ends in. The 8 is in the tenths place, the 0 is in the hundredths, the 1 is in the thousandths. So you read the complete number again, 800. Be careful not to put the word and in here. It's 801, not 801. 801, and then the last column name is thousandths. So it's 801 thousandths.